Nathan Calloway had everything: immense wealth, powerful business connections, and a mansion overlooking the Hollywood Hills. As the CEO of Calloway Investments, a prestigious private equity firm in Los Angeles, he graced the covers of business magazines and attended the most exclusive galas. To the world, he was the epitome of success. But beneath the glitz and glamour lay a storm of betrayal and deception. On the day he was set to finalize his divorce, Nathan strutted into the courthouse with his new mistress draped over his arm, making a bold statement for the world to see. Elena Carter, a striking brunette with piercing green eyes, clung to him like a trophy, her designer dress hugging every curve. It was a deliberate display, a challenge for the whispers and headlines that would surely follow. But what Nathan failed to realize was that his pregnant wife had a move so devastating it would shatter his entire world. To outsiders, Nathan's life was picture perfect. He had built his empire from the ground up, his financial instincts earning him accolades and cementing his place among the elite. His marriage to Juliana Calloway, née Davenport, was just another jewel in his crown. Juliana wasn't just a wealthy heiress, she was the sole successor to Davenport Biotech, a pharmaceutical empire known for its groundbreaking medical advancements. Her father, Richard Davenport, was revered for his philanthropic efforts, funding research that saved countless lives. Raised in San Francisco, Juliana had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, but family obligations pulled her into the business world instead. By her early 20s, she was already making waves in global philanthropy, ensuring her family's wealth was used for the greater good. It was at an exclusive charity gala in Manhattan where Juliana and Nathan first met, a classic tale of high society romance. Their chemistry was instant, their union seemingly written in the stars. The tabloids quickly branded them the golden couple. He, the self-made millionaire husband, and she, the philanthropic heiress with a heart of gold. Their whirlwind romance unfolded in a series of extravagant black-tie events, spontaneous getaways to Aspen, and candlelit dinners that had the world swooning. Within a year, they exchanged vows in an opulent ceremony on the Davenport estate in Napa Valley, a wedding the press hailed as the event of the decade. Yet beneath the breathtaking facade, the seeds of betrayal were already beginning to take root. Behind the perfectly curated life of Nathan and Juliana Calloway, cracks had begun to form, ones neither could ignore much longer. Their marriage, once seen as a fairy tale, had slowly morphed into something far more transactional. Richard Davenport, Juliana's father, had subtly tied his biotech empire's investments to Calloway Investments, ensuring that Nathan's firm thrived with a steady influx of capital. To the world, they were a power couple seamlessly blending finance and philanthropy, but insiders whispered that their union was built on convenience rather than love. Nathan, the millionaire husband, had a vision, one that required an ambitious partner who could complement his empire with influence and credibility. Juliana, in turn, needed someone who could handle the corporate side of her inheritance. For a while, the arrangement worked. They dazzled at elite fundraisers, raised millions for medical research, and graced magazine covers with their picture-perfect smiles. But beneath the surface, resentment brewed. Nathan had always been strategic. Every appearance, every handshake, every carefully curated social post was part of his master plan. He expected Juliana to fit into that plan seamlessly, to attend the right events, maintain the right friendships, and project the perfect image. But she had a life beyond his ambitions. Her role at Davenport Biotech, her father's legacy, demanded time and dedication, something Nathan never quite understood. Slowly, she became an afterthought. Nathan's focus shifted entirely to his growing empire. Business trips stretched longer, his after-hours meetings at exclusive clubs became more frequent, and whispers of his late-night escapades reached Juliana's ears. Their once intimate conversations turned into stiff, business-like exchanges over dinner. The warmth they once shared was now nothing more than a distant memory. Juliana's mother, Catherine, noticed the change. "Are you happy, Juliana?" she had asked one evening, her voice laced with quiet concern. Juliana hesitated before responding. She had spent years convincing herself that her marriage was still worth fighting for, but deep down she wasn't sure anymore. Nathan's star continued to rise, and Juliana, once an equal in their power dynamic, was fading into the background. He had become obsessed with wealth, influence, and expanding his empire. Meanwhile, Juliana found herself feeling like nothing more than a supporting character in his carefully crafted life. And yet, they both kept up appearances. Before cameras, they held hands, exchanged smiles, and played the part of the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, the distance between them grew, and Juliana began to wonder if their marriage had ever been real at all. Juliana felt like she was drowning in the life she had once embraced so eagerly. The world still saw her as the poised, compassionate woman beside a powerful man, but behind closed doors, she was suffocating under the weight of expectations. Late at night, when the lights of their Beverly Hills mansion cast long shadows across the marble floors, she confided in her cousin, Danielle. "He doesn't listen anymore," Juliana murmured, staring into her untouched glass of wine. "We used to talk about changing the world. Now, all Nathan cares about is expansion, acquisitions, and his next high-profile deal." Danielle sighed, her expression full of quiet understanding. "Maybe a trip? Some time away? Just the two of you?" she suggested. "Or even couples therapy?" Juliana shook her head. She already knew how Nathan would react. He would brush off the idea, dismiss it as unnecessary, a distraction from his goals. Her billionaire husband was too focused on his growing empire to see what was slipping through his fingers. With each passing month, Nathan became more consumed by success, lost in a world of boardrooms, private jets, and exclusive parties. Juliana, once the woman who stood beside him as an equal, now felt like nothing more than an accessory. The warmth that had once defined their marriage was gone, replaced by cold indifference. Their friends sensed it. Society whispers grew louder. But no one could have predicted just how spectacularly their perfect image would unravel. The cracks in their marriage, once hidden, were about to be broadcast for the world to see. Nathan's relentless pursuit of wealth and influence led him to circles where power was currency and loyalty was fleeting. It was in one of these exclusive gatherings that he met Sabrina Hayes, a sharp, ambitious public relations executive with a reputation for making and breaking reputations. She was the kind of woman who turned heads. Elegant, intelligent, and unafraid to wield her influence, Sabrina thrived in the cutthroat world of high-profile branding. Their first encounter was at a private penthouse dinner in Manhattan, an event reserved for industry elites. As she swirled her wine, her gaze met Nathan's across the room. A smirk played on her lips. She knew exactly who he was. The conversation started innocently enough, discussions about corporate image, branding strategies, and philanthropy. But beneath the professional exchanges, there was an undeniable chemistry. By the end of the night, numbers were exchanged under the guise of business. At first, their interactions revolved around work. Sabrina proposed ways to reshape Callaway Investments' public image. But as Juliana focused on her ailing father and her responsibilities at Davenport Biotech, Nathan found himself drawn deeper into Sabrina's world. A world that was about to shatter his carefully crafted life. Nathan knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't stop himself. What started as business calls with Sabrina turned into late-night conversations laced with flirtation. She wasn't just intelligent, she knew how to feed his ego, fueling his hunger for power. Unlike Juliana, who questioned his choices, Sabrina admired them. It didn't take long for their relationship to cross a line. Business dinners stretched late into the night, their meetings moving from boardrooms to dimly lit restaurants tucked away from prying eyes. When Nathan traveled to Miami for an investor summit, Sabrina was conveniently in town for client meetings. They rendezvoused at a luxury boutique hotel, careful at first, avoiding cameras, choosing private entrances. But secrecy made the affair even more intoxicating. Nathan justified his infidelity by convincing himself that Juliana was emotionally absent. She had been consumed with her father's declining health and her increasing responsibilities at Davenport Biotech. She hardly had time for their marriage. He told himself that he wasn't doing anything wrong, that he deserved to feel wanted again. For Sabrina, this was more than an affair. It was a conquest. She had spent years crafting a name for herself in public relations, molding the reputations of the elite. But nothing thrilled her more than knowing she had captured the attention of a cheating husband, especially one as high-profile as Nathan Callaway. Rumors began to swirl. Whispers of Nathan's late-night outings spread through their social circles. Friends of Juliana had spotted him at exclusive clubs at suspicious hours, often with Sabrina lingering nearby. But without hard proof, Juliana forced herself to believe he was just networking, too exhausted to entertain the idea of betrayal. That illusion shattered the night her cousin Danielle handed her a phone. "I don't want to cause drama," Danielle murmured, "but you need to see this." Juliana's heart pounded as she looked at the screen. A grainy photo, a charity gala. Nathan and Sabrina locked in a too-close dance, his hand resting dangerously low on her back, their gazes locked in a way that was anything but professional. It wasn't a tabloid headline yet. Instead, the image had circulated through private socialite circles, landing in the inboxes of those who thrived on gossip. Juliana's stomach twisted. It could have been innocent, a dance, a moment caught at the wrong angle. But deep down, she knew the truth. Nathan wasn't just slipping away from her. He had already left. Juliana told herself it was nothing. A bad angle. A moment misinterpreted. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and with each passing day, it grew into something she could no longer ignore. Nathan's absences stretched longer. When he was home, he was distant, his focus locked on his laptop or his ever-buzzing phone. He dismissed her concerns with a half-hearted kiss on the cheek or a murmured, "It's just business, Jules." But the tension between them was becoming suffocating. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. His late nights out weren't just rumors whispered in hushed circles. They were undeniable facts. The evidence was piling up, and the once dedicated husband who had stood beside her now seemed like a stranger. What Nathan didn't anticipate, however, was that his own arrogance would be his undoing. He didn't slip up in secret. He flaunted it. It was a high-profile gala at an exclusive Beverly Hills estate, an event teeming with investors, Hollywood elites, and media personalities. Juliana, emotionally drained from weeks of suspicion, had almost skipped it altogether. But something told her to go. And when she arrived, her worst fears materialized before her eyes. Nathan stood near the grand staircase, effortlessly charming a circle of high-profile guests. But it wasn't his presence that sent a chill through Juliana's body. It was Sabrina, draped on his arm, her manicured fingers resting possessively on his chest, laughing a little too intimately at his every word. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. A calculated move to let the world know exactly where they stood. And yet, as public humiliation settled into her bones, Juliana felt something unexpected, a quiet strength rising within her. Nathan had underestimated her. He had mistaken her grace for weakness. What he didn't realize was that she was far from finished. Just days later, as she struggled to process the betrayal, life threw her a twist she never saw coming. Juliana, Dr. Collins, a longtime family physician, smiled as she set down the lab results. "You're pregnant." The word sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. Joy, fear, uncertainty. She had always envisioned starting a family, picturing slow Sunday mornings in their Bel Air estate, a child running barefoot across the sunlit patio. But now, she was a pregnant wife to a man who had already left her behind. And for the first time in their marriage, Juliana knew exactly what she had to do. Juliana stood at the threshold of Nathan's home office, her hands trembling as she clutched her stomach. She had rehearsed this moment over and over in her head, picturing a version where he smiled, pulled her into his arms, and told her this the best news he had ever heard. But deep down, she knew better. "Nathan," she began softly. He barely looked up from his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Can this wait? I've got an important call in the morning." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay steady. "No, it can't." She hesitated before taking a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the room was silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the far wall. Slowly, Nathan's eyes flickered up to meet hers, his expression unreadable. Surprise? Worry? Something else lurked there, something that made her stomach twist. "That's big news," he finally said, reaching for the glass of bourbon beside him as if searching for stability. He took a slow sip, buying himself time. "Wow, congratulations, I guess." Juliana's heart sank. "We should talk about this," she pressed, her voice cracking slightly. "We need to figure out what this means for us." Nathan let out a deep sigh and shut his laptop with a little too much force. "Juliana, this is a lot to process. My schedule is insane right now, and we still have—" He paused, running a hand through his hair. other things to figure out in our marriage. Her breath hitched. Are you even happy about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan hesitated, then nodded, too quickly, too rehearsed. Yeah, of course I am. But the forced tone was impossible to ignore. I just think we need to be realistic. There's a lot happening at Callaway Investments. I'm traveling more than ever. This is just bad timing. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Bad timing? She echoed. This is our child, Nathan. He stood abruptly, avoiding her gaze. I need some time to think, he muttered. We'll talk in the morning. Before she could say another word, he was already walking away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Juliana remained frozen in place, the reality settling in like a weight on her chest. She had hoped for warmth, for reassurance, but all she got from her millionaire husband was cold indifference. And that hurt more than anything. Nathan barely mentioned the pregnancy after that night. He had offered no words of excitement, no reassurances, just silence. If anything, he became even more distant. Days passed, and then suddenly he was gone. A brief note left on the kitchen counter. Urgent trip to Miami. Deal to close. Back in a week. No explanation, no call, nothing. Juliana stared at the words, her gut telling her this wasn't just business. And she wasn't wrong. The confirmation came from an unexpected source. Danielle. Her cousin had taken matters into her own hands, hiring a private investigator without Juliana's knowledge. When she called, her voice was tight with anger. Jules, I need you to listen to me. Nathan isn't in Miami for business. Juliana's hands clenched around the phone. What are you saying? He was seen at a 5-star restaurant last night, with her. They weren't exactly keeping things professional. A sharp pain twisted in Juliana's chest. She had tried so hard to believe in him, to ignore the whispers and late nights. But now she had proof. Her cheating husband was parading his mistress in plain sight. When Nathan finally returned home, he strolled through the door as if nothing had happened, loosening his tie, his expression unreadable. But Juliana was ready. The living room table was covered with evidence, printed photos, credit card statements, and text messages. Nathan froze, his gaze darting over the damning proof before flickering to Juliana's face. What the hell is this? He demanded, feigning confusion. Her voice was low, trembling with anger. You tell me. She gestured to the receipts from the Fontainebleau Hotel, the images of him and Sabrina leaving a restaurant at midnight. You've been lying to me, Nathan. Lying to your pregnant wife. For a fleeting second, he was silent, caught off guard. Then his expression hardened, his ego kicking in. You were spying on me? He snapped. That's a violation of my privacy. Juliana let out a hollow laugh. Privacy? You lost that when you broke your vows. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Fine. Yes, Sabrina and I are together. And you know what? We're happy. We have real chemistry, something you and I lost a long time ago. The words sliced through her like a blade, but she didn't let him see her break. Get out, she whispered, her voice laced with quiet fury. I don't want you in this house tonight. Pack your things and leave. For the first time, Nathan looked stunned, but Juliana was done. Nathan's jaw tightened. You can't be serious, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. This is my house too, and let's not forget, your father's money is tied up in Callaway Investments. Are you sure you want to do this? Juliana's heart pounded, but she refused to let him see her waver. She pointed to the door. Yes, leave. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sharp motion, he grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the crystal sconces rattled on the wall. The moment he was gone, the weight of it all crashed down on her. She sank into a chair, tears spilling freely, yet woven with a new kind of strength. Gently, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. We'll be okay, she whispered to the life growing inside her. Nathan had no idea what he had just set in motion. Days passed and he never returned. Instead, his name exploded across headlines, his affair no longer a quiet whisper, but a full-blown scandal. Paparazzi swarmed outside his luxury penthouse, where Sabrina now resided, courtesy of Nathan's deep pockets. High society, once captivated by the Callaway's fairy tale romance, now dissected his downfall with fascination. Despite the media frenzy, Juliana maintained a dignified silence. She had no choice. The press hounded her for a statement. Investors scrutinized her family's foundation, and whispers of the impending divorce threatened the stability of Davenport Biotech. She needed help, and fast. Seated across from her father's longtime attorney, Charles Whitmore, she listened as he flipped through a thick folder of legal documents. The high-rise office overlooked downtown Los Angeles, but Juliana's mind was elsewhere, on the battle ahead. Charles leaned forward, his voice steady. "Juliana, we need to think strategically. This isn't just about your personal life. This affects your father's legacy, your child's future, and your financial independence." She swallowed hard. "Nathan already warned me. He's going to fight for everything. He'll claim my inheritance was part of his firm's success." Charles nodded, expression grim. "That's his only angle. But it won't hold up in court unless he proves you intended those funds to merge with his assets." She clenched her fists. Nathan had built his empire with the illusion of control. But this time, he had underestimated her. Her billionaire husband thought he could strip her of everything. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. "If we can prove the funds were strictly for philanthropic ventures or remained under your name, we have a strong case," Charles said, his voice steady. "But be prepared, Juliana. This could get ugly." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Danielle flashed across the screen. "Nathan's at the courthouse. With Sabrina." Something about divorce papers. Juliana's stomach dropped. She barely muttered a goodbye to Charles before rushing out, hailing a cab and gripping her purse tightly as she sped toward the courthouse. She had expected Nathan to make his move, but not like this. Not publicly. Not with her. When the taxi pulled up, the scene was chaos. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward her face. "Juliana, is it true you're pregnant? Any comment on Nathan's affair? How will this affect Davenport Biotech?" She ignored them, pushing through the sea of voices until she stepped inside the cool, marble-floored lobby. And there he was. Nathan Calloway. Standing near the clerk's office, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his posture exuding confidence. And beside him, draped in a striking red dress and heels, was Sabrina, her arm looped around his, a smug smirk playing at her lips as she surveyed the scene. The display was deliberate, a statement. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted the world to see. Juliana's breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Nathan barely glanced at her as he handed a stack of papers to the clerk. "Filing for divorce," he said casually. Didn't see the need to wait. Juliana felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. But it wasn't just the betrayal. It was the millionaire husband she had once loved turning their marriage into a media spectacle. "You're turning this into a circus," she managed, her voice trembling. Nathan met her gaze, the faintest smirk on his lips. "Let them watch. The press has been dying for a story like this. Might as well control the narrative." Juliana clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palm as Sabrina stepped forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Juliana," she purred, her eyes alight with amusement. "But sometimes relationships just run their course." Juliana inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stand tall. She wouldn't let them see her break. Her eyes locked onto Nathan's. "Is this truly what you want?" For the briefest moment, Nathan's confidence wavered. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face before he masked it with cold indifference. "Yes," he said flatly. "This marriage is over." Juliana's nails dug into her palms, but she refused to let the pain show. If he wanted to end their life together, she wouldn't beg. Instead, she lifted her chin, steel hardening in her chest. "Fine," she said, her voice unwavering. "Have your divorce, Nathan, but don't think for 1 second that you'll walk away from this unscathed." She turned on her heel, refusing to meet Sabrina's self-satisfied smirk as she exited. Outside, the paparazzi pounced, cameras flashing as questions were hurled in her direction. "Juliana, is it true Nathan filed for divorce? Were you blindsided? How do you feel about Sabrina replacing you?" She said nothing, her tear-streaked face now plastered across social media before she even reached her car. Back at Charles Whitmore's office, she recounted the public humiliation, her voice trembling with rage. This time, she didn't bother holding back the tears. Charles listened intently, then leaned forward. "Juliana, there's more at stake than your personal heartbreak. Nathan isn't just a businessman. He's connected to high-level players in finance and politics. If we're going to protect your inheritance and your child's future, we need to be prepared for a ruthless battle." She wiped her tears away, a fire rekindling in her chest. "What do I do next?" He offered a knowing smile. "We build an airtight legal team. We trace every dollar that ties Davenport Biotech to Callaway Investments and ensure he can't manipulate the system. But," he paused, studying her carefully, "I have a feeling you already have something up your sleeve." Juliana exhaled slowly. He wasn't wrong. Her father, Richard Davenport, had been more than just a businessman. He was a strategist. Over the years, he had built not just an empire, but a network of powerful allies. He had always warned her about trusting too easily in marriage, and she now suspected that somewhere in his meticulously kept files lay something that could shift the power in her favor. She spent night after night buried in dusty legal documents and financial statements, until finally she found it. A series of agreements, ones that revealed a hidden clause between Davenport Biotech and Callaway Investments, one that, if proven, could strip Nathan of everything he had built. Her wealthy husband had spent years believing he was untouchable, but Juliana was about to prove him very, very wrong. Juliana's hands trembled as she scanned the legal documents, her father's signature standing as a silent warning from the past. Richard Davenport had always been cautious, wary of the man his daughter had married. Now, she finally understood why. Buried deep within the agreement between Davenport Biotech and Callaway Investments was a clause, one that could change everything. In the simplest terms, if Nathan breached the integrity of their marriage, any funds invested in his company under the Davenport name would be subject to full reclamation. That meant every dime her father had funneled into Callaway Investments, the very foundation of Nathan's empire, could be ripped away if the court deemed his affair a violation of trust. Juliana swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She met Charles Whitmore's steady gaze as he reviewed the paperwork with admiration. "Your father was always a step ahead," he murmured. "The real question is, can we enforce this?" Danielle leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "Nathan's affair is public knowledge. That has to be enough." Charles set the papers down, his fingers steepled in thought. "If we can argue that his reckless behavior compromised the integrity of the business partnership, especially with the media frenzy surrounding him, then yes, the court may rule in our favor." Juliana took a deep breath, feeling a surge of determination. "I refuse to let him walk away with my family's legacy. He started this war when he humiliated me at the courthouse. Now, I'll make sure he regrets it." What she didn't know was that Nathan was already preparing his counterattack. Encouraged by Sabrina's relentless ambition, he was pushing for a swift divorce settlement, one that would leave Juliana with as little as possible. But Sabrina wanted more. She wanted control. "You need leverage," she told Nathan one evening, swirling a glass of red wine in their penthouse. "Push for custody of the baby. If Juliana thinks she could lose her child, she'll fold." Nathan hesitated. "The courts would never rule in my favor. She has no scandals, no instability." Sabrina smirked. "That's where your legal team comes in." His attorney, Caroline Adler, was a shark, ruthless and methodical. But even she warned him that his public image had already taken a hit. "Pursuing custody could backfire," she cautioned. "The judge may see it as a power play, especially given your very public affair." Nathan clenched his jaw. The last thing he wanted was to lose everything. He had built Callaway Investments from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let his rich husband's status slip away because of one mistake. But Juliana wasn't backing down, and neither was he. Nathan had always believed he was untouchable. His wealth, influence, and carefully constructed public image had shielded him from any real consequences. Even with the scandal, he convinced himself that his powerful husband persona would protect him. He was wrong. Juliana was done waiting. She arranged a meeting at Callaway Investments, walking into the sleek, glass-walled office with Danielle by her side. The air was thick with tension as they stepped into Nathan's private conference room. The marble floors gleamed beneath the recessed lighting, but the sterile elegance did little to soften the hostility brimming in the room. Nathan was seated behind his massive mahogany desk, his posture exuding calm control. But the moment he saw the documents in Juliana's hands, a flicker of unease crossed his face. Beside him, Sabrina perched on a chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "What's this?" Nathan asked, gesturing toward the thick file in Juliana's hands. She placed it on the table, her voice steady. "Proof that my father included a clause in his investments, one that protects my family's financial stake in your company, and it's triggered when there's a moral or ethical breach of trust." Sabrina scoffed. "What does that even mean?" Juliana ignored her, keeping her gaze locked on Nathan. "It means that by publicly humiliating me, by violating our vows, you forfeited any claim to the Davenport funds. And worse, you're legally required to return every cent of the profits those funds generated." Silence filled the room. Nathan's jaw clenched, a vein pulsing at his temple. Sabrina's smug expression faltered, her eyes darting between them. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "You have no proof." Juliana reached into the folder and slid a stack of printed news articles across the table. Headlines detailing Nathan's affair, photos of him and Sabrina at exclusive parties, social media commentary dissecting his downfall. "No proof?" she echoed, arching an eyebrow. "Nathan made sure there was proof every time he flaunted you around town." Nathan pushed back from the desk, his palms pressing into the polished wood. "That clause will never hold up in court," he snarled. "This was a business agreement. You can't just rip money out of my company because you're bitter." Juliana inhaled, steadying herself. "I'm not bitter, Nathan. I'm protecting what's rightfully mine and my child's." Danielle leaned in, her voice cool. "We can negotiate, or we can take this to court. And trust me, the tabloids would love that story." For the first time, Nathan hesitated. Juliana knew then. She had him exactly where she wanted. Nathan's confidence was slipping. The arrogance that had once fueled his every move was now replaced with something foreign, uncertainty. Sabrina's nails dug into his wrist. "You're not actually going to let her take Callaway Investments, right?" she hissed. His jaw tightened. "This is a negotiation tactic. She's trying to scare me." But deep down, he wasn't sure. He had spent years crafting an empire built on power and perception, but now both were crumbling. Davenport Biotech's investments had woven themselves so deeply into Callaway Investments that if Juliana's legal team proved her claim, he could lose everything. He cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "Give me time to handle this," he murmured. "I'll talk to Caroline and see how we can settle it." Juliana didn't wait for him to act. She had already walked away, knowing she had finally forced his hand. As she stepped into the elevator with Danielle, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This wasn't over, but for the first time in months, she felt something close to control. Nathan, meanwhile, scrambled to untangle his finances, calling in a team of accountants to find any loophole, any way to separate Davenport money from his company before it was too late. He assured his investors that everything was fine, but whispers of uncertainty had already started circulating. Sabrina watched his growing unease with frustration. "Nathan, you promised me this wouldn't be an issue." His patience thinned. "I said I'd handle it." But behind closed doors, even he wasn't sure. Juliana, on the other hand, retreated from the chaos. She returned to her family estate in Napa Valley, choosing peace over the relentless media circus in Los Angeles. Headlines swirled: "The fall of Callaway Investments, a high society divorce war. Juliana strikes back." Yet she gave no statements, made no public appearances. Instead, she focused on the life growing inside her. Late at night, she would run her hands over her stomach, feeling the quiet strength of her unborn child. She had lost so much, but she refused to let her baby grow up in the shadow of a broken marriage. Nathan had once been the rich and powerful husband she believed would stand beside her for life. Now, he was just another man terrified of losing what he thought he owned. And Juliana? She was just getting started. Nathan's world was unraveling, and for the first time in his career, he had no control. Investors were growing wary. Business deals that once seemed like a sure thing were now slipping through his fingers. The media frenzy surrounding his personal life had bled into his professional world, and whispers of instability at Callaway Investments were spreading. Under mounting pressure, he retreated to the penthouse he had purchased for Sabrina, hoping for some respite. But their once glamorous nights had turned into hours of tense phone calls with attorneys and bitter arguments about Juliana's demands. "This is insane," Sabrina snapped, arms crossed as she leaned against the grand piano in the corner of the suite. "You're really going to let Juliana walk away with a fortune?" Nathan exhaled sharply, pacing across the marble floor. "It's not just about the money," he muttered. "If the courts suspect fraud or breach of contract, they could freeze my assets. That would cripple Callaway Investments." Sabrina's nails tapped impatiently against her wine glass. "So what's the plan? Beg Juliana for mercy?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "I need leverage, something to force her into a deal." A slow, cunning smile spread across Sabrina's lips. "She's pregnant, Nathan. That's your leverage." He frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "Custody," she said simply. "If you fight for the baby, she might be willing to settle just to avoid the public battle." Nathan hesitated. The idea of using his unborn child as a pawn made his stomach churn. But his hesitation was drowned out by the relentless drum of financial ruin. "She'll never believe a judge would rule in my favor," he murmured, almost to himself. "She's stable, respected, and has no scandals." Sabrina shrugged. "Custody battles have been won on less. Your legal team just has to frame her as emotionally unstable or argue that you can provide a more secure environment." "Money talks, Nathan. If you find the right psychologist willing to testify, you might actually stand a chance." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, torn between revulsion and desperation. Was this really his only option? The thought of losing Callaway Investments, his life's work, was unbearable. Finally, he took a slow breath, pushing down the last traces of doubt. "I'll do what I have to do." His voice was quiet, more like a man convincing himself than anyone else. That very week, his attorney, Caroline Adler, scheduled an emergency meeting with Charles Whitmore. Juliana thought she had won, but her wealthy ex-husband wasn't finished with her yet. Nathan's next move was his most ruthless yet. His attorney, Caroline Adler, delivered the ultimatum. Juliana was to relinquish her claim to the Davenport funds, or he would pursue full custody of their unborn child. His legal team was prepared to argue that given the stress of her father's passing and the emotional toll of the divorce, she was unfit to be a mother. It was a brutal, calculated play. When Charles Whitmore relayed the news to Juliana, she was at her family's estate, resting in anticipation of her second trimester checkup. Danielle sat beside her, their expressions darkening as Charles outlined Nathan's plan. Juliana's hands instinctively cradled her stomach, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's threatening to take my baby?" For a moment, fear paralyzed her. She envisioned drawn-out courtroom battles, false accusations, and the relentless scrutiny of the press. Danielle squeezed her hand. "Don't let him intimidate you. He's desperate." Charles nodded. "He has almost no chance of winning custody. His reputation is in shambles, and no judge will ignore that. But the stress of a legal battle could take a toll on you, and that's what he's banking on." Juliana inhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. She could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "Stay strong. Find a solution." Instead of breaking, she felt her determination harden into something fierce. "You tell Nathan Callaway," she said, her eyes blazing, "that if he wants a war, I won't flinch. And if he dares to drag my pregnancy through the mud, I will make sure the entire world sees him for what he really is." Charles smirked with admiration. "I'll let Caroline know we're preparing a counteroffensive. He won't use custody as blackmail." But Juliana had another plan, one even more powerful than legal maneuvering. Her father had spent decades cultivating relationships with influential figures in business, politics, and media. He had once told her that these networks could shape public opinion or dismantle a scandal overnight if leveraged correctly. That night, Juliana made a series of phone calls. One went to Linda Martin, an investigative journalist at the Los Angeles Chronicle, known for exposing corruption. Another went to Senator Richard Coleman, a longtime Davenport ally whose re-election campaign her father had helped fund. And so on. By the time she was done, she had laid the foundation for a public narrative, one that would paint Nathan Callaway as a billionaire ex-husband willing to use an unborn child as a pawn for financial gain. The next morning, the headlines erupted. Nathan thought he could control the story. But Juliana was about to write the ending. The op-ed, titled "Bravado and Betrayal, the High-Stakes Divorce of the Year," didn't mention Nathan by name, but it didn't need to. The entire country knew who it was about. A ruthless financier, a scorned, pregnant wife, a battle for power, wealth, and control. The public, already disgusted by the scandal, took sides, and they sided with Juliana. She was the devoted philanthropist, the expectant mother shielding her child's future. Nathan, on the other hand, was cast as the callous tycoon parading his mistress while plotting to use custody as a bargaining chip. His desperation grew. His legal team advised him to lay low, but Sabrina wasn't having it. "You need to control the narrative," she snapped. "This is spiraling." But every attempt Nathan made to salvage his image backfired. Paparazzi resurfaced old clips of him and Sabrina drinking at exclusive parties, while tabloids ran endless headlines about his declining empire. Then, late one night, Juliana's phone buzzed. Nathan's name glowed on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Juliana," he said, his voice quieter than she expected. "This has gotten out of hand." She inhaled sharply, memories of their better days threatening to surface. "It didn't have to," she murmured. "You made it this way." A long pause, then a sigh. "I want to negotiate privately. No attorneys, no press, just us." Juliana pressed a hand against her stomach, grounding herself. She thought of her father's legal documents, her child's future, and the promise she had made to protect them both. "Fine," she said at last. "I'll meet you. But understand this, Nathan. If I even sense that you're playing me again, I won't hold back. I will bring you and Callaway Investments down, clause or no clause." A hesitation. Then, almost contritely, he murmured, "Tomorrow, noon, the old lake house." As she ended the call, her heart twisted, not in longing, but in finality. She had once loved this man, the one who had held her hand at charity galas, whispered promises at their wedding, and stood beside her in a life they had built together. But that man was gone. The next morning, she made the drive from Napa Valley to Lake Tahoe. The sky was overcast, heavy with the weight of an impending storm, as though the universe itself braced for the confrontation ahead. Juliana rested a protective hand over her belly. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her millionaire ex-husband had underestimated her once. It would be his last mistake. The lake house in Lake Tahoe had once been a sanctuary for Juliana and Nathan, a place of candlelit dinners and whispered confessions under the stars. But as she pulled up the winding driveway, it felt cold, unfamiliar, a monument to love gone sour. Through the glass windows, she spotted him standing near the fireplace, his silhouette rigid against the backdrop of the still water. He looked different, gaunt, weary, the weight of his crumbling empire visible in the dark circles under his eyes. Gone was the effortless confidence that had once defined him. She stepped inside, settling onto the leather sofa near the hearth, where they had once curled up together on quiet Sunday mornings. But today there was no warmth left between them. Nathan remained standing, arms crossed as if needing the advantage of height. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice subdued. "I hope we can settle this without dragging it out in public." Juliana let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "A public spectacle? Whose fault is that, Nathan?" His jaw clenched. "I know I've made mistakes, but you're not making this easy. You went to the press, you turned people against me." Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "You did that yourself." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "I called you here to make a proposal." He reached for a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward her. "This is my offer. A settlement. You'll receive a lump sum, full financial support for the baby, and property in Napa. In return, you relinquish any claim to Callaway Investments." Juliana's fingers hovered over the pages before flipping through them. The numbers were generous. But there was one clause that stood out. By signing, she would forfeit her right to enforce her father's contract, the very clause that could dismantle Nathan's empire. Her billionaire ex-husband wasn't just offering a settlement, he was trying to buy her silence. Her grip on the papers tightened. "And what happens if your legal team comes after me for custody later?" Nathan shook his head. "If you sign, I'll waive any custody fight. You'll have full rights. Shared custody when you're ready, but I won't challenge you in court." For the first time, his voice wavered, just enough to betray his desperation. Juliana met his gaze, searching for sincerity, but trust had been shattered beyond repair, and she wasn't about to sign away her power. "Juliana, let's be honest," Nathan sighed, rubbing his temple. "You'll be fine financially. You don't need to burn everything down to prove a point. Destroying my company won't bring back what we lost." She studied him, trying to decipher if he truly believed he was being fair. Maybe in his mind, he was. But as she flipped another page, scanning the carefully worded clauses, she saw the real trap. The settlement offered a fortune, but it came with a price, one that had nothing to do with money. If she accepted, she would be erasing the safeguards her father had put in place. She would be walking away from the very principles of trust and integrity that he had spent his life building. She closed the folder with a quiet finality. "You don't understand, Nathan. This isn't just about money. It's about my father's legacy. He trusted you. He believed in you." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "And you betrayed that trust, publicly, shamelessly. If I sign this, I let you walk away without consequences." His jaw tightened, frustration flickering in his eyes. "And what good does humiliating me in court do? We loved each other once. We built a life together. Doesn't that mean anything?" Her throat tightened, but she held her ground. "It meant everything," she whispered, "until you threw it away. I'm not the one who flaunted an affair, who used our child as a weapon and then tried to buy my silence." For the first time, something in Nathan cracked. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. He turned toward the window, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was stupid," he admitted. "I was terrified of losing everything I built. You know how I grew up, struggling, always on the outside looking in. I spent my whole life chasing power, and when I finally had it, I let it consume me." For a fleeting moment, Juliana saw the man she had fallen in love with, the ambitious, relentless entrepreneur who had once held her with so much tenderness. But that man was long gone, buried beneath greed, arrogance, and regret. She rose from the couch, the folder still in her hands. "I'll think about your offer," she said, her voice unwavering. "But don't expect me to yield just because we share a past." Nathan nodded slowly, defeat shadowing his features. "I understand." At the door, she hesitated, turning back to face him. "I hope you find a way to live with yourself after this, Nathan." Her expression hardened. "Because one day, our child will know exactly who their billionaire ex-husband father really was." And with that, she walked away, leaving him to sit in the ruins of his own making. Nathan didn't answer. He simply gave a small nod, as though the weight of Juliana's words was heavier than anything he could say. As she walked out of the lake house, a storm of emotions churned inside her. Pity, anger, maybe even sorrow for the man he used to be. Driving away, she flipped through the settlement papers one more time. The financial offer was staggering, enough to ensure a life of luxury. The properties listed in Napa, Aspen, and Manhattan were more than sufficient. Yet, the moment she thought about signing, a tightness settled in her chest. It wasn't about money, it never had been. Giving in would mean erasing everything her father had worked for, letting Nathan escape the consequences of his actions. It would send the message that power and influence could override integrity. By the time she reached Boston, her mind was made up. She would fight, not for revenge, but for justice, for her unborn child, for her father's legacy, and perhaps even for the version of Nathan who had once believed in something more than wealth and status. But what she didn't know was that her decision would trigger a chain of events so explosive, it would captivate the nation and leave an indelible mark on high society. The final blow had yet to be delivered. And when it came, it would be far more devastating than any financial loss Nathan could have imagined. By the time the divorce trial began, the case had become a full-blown media spectacle. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Every tabloid, every financial news outlet was covering Callaway v. Callaway as the scandal of the year. Juliana arrived 6 months pregnant, poised and unshaken. Across the room, Nathan walked in, flanked by Sabrina and his elite legal team, his usual confidence dulled by the looming consequences. The courtroom was tense as both sides laid out their arguments. Charles Whitmore methodically dismantled Nathan's defense, presenting Ronald Davenport's ironclad clause. He made it clear. Nathan's public betrayal had breached the trust that anchored the financial partnership. Nathan's attorneys scrambled to argue that morality had no place in corporate contracts, but witness testimonies painted a damning picture of a man consumed by greed and arrogance. When the closing arguments ended, Judge Goldstein barely hesitated before delivering his verdict. The clause stood. Nathan was ordered to repay every cent of the Davenport investments, including profits. In one ruling, Callaway Investments was left teetering on the brink of collapse. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the reality of the financial destruction settled in. Juliana, unmoved by the chaos, walked out with her dignity intact and her future secure. The fallout was swift. Investors fled, stocks plummeted. The company Nathan had built brick by brick was now crumbling beneath him. And then the final betrayal. Sabrina left. She had chased him for power, for status, for the illusion of untouchability. But with his empire in ruins, she wasted no time moving on. Nathan Callaway, once a titan of industry, was left with nothing but his shattered reputation. Meanwhile, Juliana quietly returned to Boston, focusing on what truly mattered, her daughter, Aurora. She refused to grant interviews, ignoring the media frenzy that followed her every move. Rumors swirled, but she remained silent, content in the knowledge that she had upheld her father's legacy and secured her child's future. Nathan had once believed that his wealth could shield him from consequences. That power could buy him loyalty. But in the end, his billionaire ex-husband's arrogance led to his downfall. He had lost everything: his company, his fortune, his respectability, all because he had underestimated the quiet strength of the woman he had betrayed. And as Juliana stood by the window of her estate, cradling her newborn daughter in her arms, she knew one thing for certain: integrity will always outshine wealth. If you found this story captivating, filled with scandal, betrayal, and ultimate justice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more riveting tales of power, love, and revenge. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling, and we can't wait to bring you the next unforgettable saga. Stay tuned.